It is strange to think that we're going to still be digesting our turkey and eating latkes for Hanukkah. How does that happen? The good news is it's a quirk of the Jewish calendar. There's a leap month. We're in a leap year. So there's going to be an Adar 1 and Adar 2, which is the month. And just before Purim, we're going to have Adar 1, and we'll be back again. So Hanukkah will be back where it belongs next year around. There's another unique feature about the calendar, the Jewish calendar, and that is that Jews have no holiday that celebrates a person. In the U.S., we have President's Day, we have Washington and Lincoln's birthday, we have Martin Luther King Day, we even have, or had, Columbus Day, may it rest in peace. So anyway, that fact that there is no Jewish holiday for a person reflects a literary quality of the Torah. The Torah is full of stories of individuals, on one hand, Abraham and Sarah's story, Isaac and Rebekah's story, Moses, even Miriam. And in the same time, it has stories of the nation, the collective, if you will, the Israelites in slavery and their journey from slavery to freedom, the Israelites at Sinai and receiving Torah, the Israelites attempting to enter the land of Israel. And our holidays are not focused on the individuals, but they're focused on the collective experiences of the nation. Passover, we say, we were slaves in Egypt. For Sukkot, we dwell in booths. Why? Because our ancestors dwelt in booths, we say. Shavuot, we go through some of the rituals. We eat dairy. We stand for the Ten Commandments because our ancestors stood at Mount Sinai, and so we emulate them in our actions. So what that means is then that Jewish identity is qualitatively different from other religions. Christianity is mostly focused on the life and death of Jesus and its meaning for the individual Christian. Islam has holidays that are mostly focused on either events in Muhammad's life or the individual spiritual state of the worshiper, of the Muslim. But Judaism is different. So it begs the question, why was the experience of the collective so important to our ancestors as they crafted this religion that we've come to love and to follow? So an answer, I think, is that it was an ancient form of establishing truth through the wisdom of the collective experience. Let me explain. Israel was a small nation. It sought to establish its own unique national story, its unique encounter with God, its belief that this God, this unique God, this single God, would protect the nation. This in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Egypt was dominant, sometimes an ally, sometimes an enemy, sometimes a threat. Assyria, mostly a threat. Babylonia, always a threat. And each of those surrounding nations was far more mighty than Israel, and they could easily quash that small nation. So how do you prove, if I had two hands, I'd do this, how do you prove Israel's resilience? How do you make the case that Israel could survive those mighty and belligerent nations? The answer is you tell a story of divine favor and protection, and you support your story by saying that hundreds of thousands of people witnessed it. Hundreds of thousands witnessed the Exodus, the Torah says. Hundreds of thousands stood at Sinai and wandered through the desert, the Torah says. Hundreds of thousands claimed the land of Israel for future generations. And because so many people witnessed it, the ancient logic then concluded that it wasn't fantasy, it wasn't legend, it was fact. It happened, and God will always be with the Israelite nation. So Jewish identity then becomes, moving forward, based on that collective perspective. And our observance of the holidays is essentially re-experiencing each of them along with our historic ancients. We become fellow participants in history, and our own connection to our peoplehood is strengthened because it becomes our truth through the re-experiencing of these collective events. Jewish identity, I'm going to suggest then, is a manifestation of an ancient form of what we can call collective wisdom or collective knowledge. More on that later. That was then. So now let's roll forward generations and generations, thousands of years to now. Different times, different context, different sense of what constitutes evidence to prove the veracity of circumstances or assertions. But human nature hasn't changed that much. We still have a need to establish truth, to establish the truthfulness of events, the truth of science and medicine, the truths that underpin our very society. So a modern understanding of collective wisdom can work for us as well. Collective knowledge, or collective wisdom, use the words interchangeably, is the sum of the learnings and the informed knowledge of the largest group of experts. It stands in contrast to individual experiences. You've heard someone say, I'm not sure if it's a fact, but it feels right. Or someone say, based on my experience, this is the truth. Now, Judaism doesn't negate personal experiences, doesn't negate individual experiences. After all, we tell the story of individuals in our sacred texts. Sarah's story, Rebecca's story, Rachel's story. But it does suggest, by the way those two things are juxtaposed in the Torah, that individual accounts aren't enough. For us today, the experience of the expert majority provides us with our collective wisdom and affirms truths that transcend individual experience. There is just no way for us as individuals to know all there is to know about the world. The world is far too complicated. And so we have to rely on the information we get from experts. And the principle of collective wisdom affirms that the wisdom of the experts is most likely to be the truth. There are always going to be outliers. There will always be dissenters. There will always be naysayers. There will always be ideologues. And they may provide an interesting counterpoint, or depending upon your perspective, an irritant, but they aren't enough to establish facts and truth. Now, our world is extraordinarily different from the ancients. We're accosted by opinions and assertions and conclusions from a host of sources. And often we might feel, quotes again, feel that some source is more convincing than another. However, the principle of collective wisdom advises us against having our feelings lead us to conclusions. We owe it to ourselves to recognize that when and if a majority of experts, that is, people who dedicate their lives and their careers to ferreting out the truth, affirm that something is true, then it most likely is. In our world, we witness a host of bloviators declaring the experts in the majority to be liars. Some of their ideas are picked up by even small armies of believers. But don't be deceived by the noise. It is a form of deception. It seeks to undermine the wisdom of the informed collective. It's dangerous, it's destructive, and it leads to the dissemination of lies. And we can push back. We can affirm collective wisdom. But we have to look, and how do we do that? We have to look at the source. We have to ask ourselves about the motives of the source. And we have to reflect on the qualifications of that source. Does that source or those speakers represent the collective wisdom of the true experts? Or are they the outliers and the dissenters? Are they driven more by personal motives and ideologies than actual facts? And if that's the case, we owe it to ourselves to move on and to turn to those who are actually qualified to provide the information we seek. Our world is filled with a lot of static. It often takes a great deal of mental effort to filter out the noise. It sometimes is overwhelming. But if we make that effort, if we commit ourselves to seeking the truth, even if it challenges what we feel or what we wish or want to believe, not only are we doing ourselves a favor, but we're ensuring that the voices of reason and evidence-based knowledge will be strengthened in our world. And I can guarantee you that all of us will be better off for our efforts. Ken Yehi Ratzon. So may it be.